Hey there, Rappies. Rapper9198 here. Welcome to another edition of Ryan's Day Reading. So today I'll be reading Chapter 5 from How to Train Your Dragon, A Chat with Old Wrinkly. So, here we go with this, alright? The next morning, Hiccup checked the dragon under his bed, and it was still asleep. When his mother, Vahalarama, asked him at breakfast, "How did initiation go yesterday, dear?" Hiccup said, "Oh, it was fine. I caught my dragon." "That's nice, dear," Vahalarama replied vaguely. Stoik the Vast looked up briefly from his bowl and boomed, "Excellent, excellent," before getting back to the important task of shoveling food in his mouth. After breakfast, Hiccup went to sit on the front step beside his grandfather, who was smoking a pipe. There's Stoik Bass. Here he is, scarfing down his breakfast. Oh my goodness. After breakfast, Hiccup went to sit on the front step beside his grandfather, who was smoking a pipe. It was a beautiful, cold, clear winter's morning, with not a breath of wind, and the sea all around as flat as glass. Old Wrinkly blew out smoke rings contentedly as he watched the sun coming up. Hiccup shivered and chucked stones into the bracken. Neither of them spoke for a long time. At last, Hiccup said, "I got that dragon." I said you would, didn't I?" replied Old Wrinkly. So very pleased with himself, Old Wrinkly had taken up soothsaying in his old age, most unsuccessfully. Looking into the future is a complicated business. So he was particularly pleased that he had gotten this right. "Something extraordinary you did," complained "Something extraordinary, you said?" complained Hiccup. "A truly unusual dragon, you said. An animal that would really make me stand out in the crowd." "Absolutely," agreed Old Wrinkly. The entrails were undeniable. "The only extraordinary thing about this dragon," continued Hiccup, "is how extraordinarily small it is, in that it is super unusual. I'm even more of a laughingstock than ever." "Oh dear," said Old Wrinkly, chuckling in a wheezy way over his pipe. Hiccup looked at him reproachfully. Old Wrinkly hurriedly turned the laugh into a cough. "Size is all relative, Hiccup," said Old Wrinkly. "All of these dragons are super small compared to a real sea dragon. A real sea dragon is 50 times as big as that little creature. A real sea dragon from the bottom of the ocean can swallow 10 large Viking ships in one gulp and not even notice. A real sea dragon is a cruel, careless mystery like the mighty ocean itself. One moment calm as a scallop, the next raging like an octopus." "Well, here on Burke," said Hiccup, "where we haven't any sea dragons to compare anything with, my dragon is just considerably smaller than anybody else's." You are getting off the point." "Am I?" asked Old Wrinkly. "The point is, I just don't see how I'm ever going to become a hero," said Hiccup gloomily. "I'm at least heroic boy in the whole hooligan tribe." "Oh, pshaw! How ridiculous this ridiculous tribe," fumed Old Wrinkly. "Okay, so you are not what we call a born hero, but you're not big and tough and charismatic like Snotlout. But you're just going to have to work at it. You're going to have to learn how to be a hero the hard way. Anyway, said Old Wrinkly, it might just it might be just what this tribe needs, a change in leadership style. Because the thing is, times are changing. We can't get away with being bigger and more violent than everybody else anymore. Imagination, that's what they need, and what you've got. A hero of the future is going to have to be clever and cunning, not just a big lump with overdeveloped muscles. He's going to have to stop everyone quarreling among themselves and get them to face the enemy together. How am I going to persuade anybody to do anything? Asked Hiccup. They've started calling me Hiccup the Useless. That is not a great name for a military leader. You have to see the bigger picture, Hiccup, continued Old Wrinkly, ignoring him. You're called a few names. You're not a natural at basketball. Who cares? These are very little problems in the grand scheme of things. It's all very well for you to say they're little problems, said Hiccup crossly. But I have a lot of little problems. I have to train this super small dragon in time for Thor's Day Thursday, or be thrown out of the hairy hooligan tribe forever. Ah, yes, said Old Wrinkly thoughtfully. There's a book on this subject, isn't there? Remind me, how does the great professor of Meathead University think you should train a dragon? He thinks you should yell at it, said Hiccup, gloomily chucking stones again. Show the beast who is master by the sheer charismatic force of your personality, that sort of thing. I have about as much charisma as a stranded jellyfish, and yelling is just another thing I am useless at. Yes, said Old Wrinkly, but maybe you'll have to train your dragon the hard way. You know a very great deal about dragons, don't you, Hiccup? All that dragon watching you've been doing over the years? That's a secret, said Hiccup uncomfortably. I've seen you talking to them, said Old Wrinkly. That's not true, protested Hiccup, going bright red in the face. Okay then, soothed Old Wrinkly, calmly smoking his pipe. It's not true. And there was silence for a bit. Yeah. And I do have to say, I think that's a really good point there. It's like, we have to think about the big picture sometimes. When we have stresses in our lives, I do think that is another, we have to put things into perspective. Like, there's other people who may be in a much less fortunate position than you are, who, there are a lot of bigger problems than probably the ones that anybody watching may have. So I think that's another good concept that's being talked about here. I wanted to mention that. So I do think that's a really good point, a good message for everybody out there, is like, with problems and stresses we may have in our lives, it may not be as bad as it seems. Because you have to think about the bigger picture. And I think that's really good. All right. So anyway, Hiccup saying, it's not true. It's not true. Okay. It is true, admitted Hiccup. But for Thor's sake, don't tell anybody. They wouldn't understand. Talking to dragons is a highly unusual skill, said Old Wrinkly. Maybe, he said, you can train a dragon better by talking to it than by yelling at it. That's sweet, said Hiccup, and a very touching thought. However, a dragon is not a fluffy creature like a dog or a cat or a pony. A dragon is not going to do what you say just because you ask it pretty please. From what I know about dragons, said Hiccup, I should say that yelling was a pretty good method. But it has its limitations, doesn't it? Old Wrinkly pointed out. I would say that yelling was highly effective on any dragon smaller than the sea lion, and positively suicidal if you try it on anything larger. Why don't you come up with some alternative training schemes yourself? You might be able to add something to Professor Yabish's book. I've often thought that that book needs a little something extra. I can't quite put my finger on it. Yep. Words, said Hiccup. That book needs a lot more words. All right, and that actually concludes chapter 5. So, okay, this is a thing I know David gave me a good idea for for the reading videos that I should try to, kind of talk more, kind of give my own input onto it or something. Like, I think that's another, like, I think it's a good input right now with the conversation that Hiccup is having with old Wrinkly, is, again, look at bigger picture. And also, I think, yelling doesn't always work. I think, for example, at my job where I'm helping people with disabilities and they need guidance, and, we have to be disciplinary with them, but we don't yell, because yelling doesn't, because otherwise that makes the staff like feel like they're way up here, and then the participants feel like they're way down here. So it's, we don't want them to feel that way. So we have to be at their level. And I think that's another good concept here is that I think, because I think with the yelling at a dragon in a way, it kind of seems like that would be just a recipe for disaster and tragedy right there. But maybe not always. In the book, maybe it's not with every dragon. I think it's pretty much the same as, also probably the same as raising a child. If any, people who have children, everybody has their own different ways of raising their children. Because, there's no perfect way, there's no exactly right way to do it. There's no way to be a perfect parent, but there are a million ways to be a good one. I think it's the same in here. There's no perfect way to train a dragon, but there's a good way to do it. There's a way to be a good trainer. There's no way to be a perfect one. Yeah, so that's kind of my input on that. So yeah, I think it's really good there. I think it's nice to kind of give some of my own input there. And that's what David suggested me that I should do for this. All right, so anyway, so that's chapter 5 for you guys, and stay tuned next time for chapter 6. Meanwhile, deep in the ocean. Can't wait to see what's going on there. All right. Thank you, Rappies, very much. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Love you all to death, and God bless. All right. See you next time.